Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this presentation of OTF Connects titled Addressing Hate, Understanding Contemporary Antisemitism and Its Historical Roots with Jasmine Wong and Erez Zobari. Before we actually start the presentation itself, OTF would like us to share a short message regarding native territories. We acknowledge that we are gathered in the territories of various indigenous people, and we further recognize their stewardship of these lands in which we live, learn, work, and play. We are definitely thrilled to have each and every one of you with us tonight, this afternoon. Sorry, I'm so used to do them in the evening that I say tonight, this afternoon. We are really thrilled to have all of you with us. And we're also delighted to welcome Jasmine Wong and Erez Zobari for this new OTF Connects webinar. You will see that they are both absolutely exceptionally bright person, and they've prepared a really fantastic webinar for us today. I think it's a little bit different from what we usually do, and you will surely enjoy it. Jasmine Wong is a senior program associate with Facing History in Ourselves, where she manages programming and partnership and facilitates teacher professional development in workshops, conferences, and through social media for educators across Canada. Prior to her work with Facing History and Ourselves, Jasmine worked as a classroom teacher, adult education facilitator, and research assistant in cancer epidemiology. She earned her MA in Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership Studies at Stanford University, and her BEd from OISE. She joins us today from Toronto on the traditional homeland of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat Nation. Erez Zobari is the second presenter today. She's a program specialist at Facing History and Ourselves and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Education from Queen's University. Erez graduated as an English and History high school teacher with a specialization in social justice education, and is passionate about empowering youth through engaging content. My name is Michel Botman. I work as a moderator for OTF. I've done that for a number of years. It will be my pleasure to help Jasmine and Erez throughout their presentation today, although I believe that they are both Zoom wizards and won't need much assistance, I'm entirely sure. If you're wondering what is the origin of my Pink Panther Inspector Clouseau accent, I was born in the French part of Belgium, where I grew up, but I also lived and worked in France, in Paris, for a number of years before immigrating to Canada. Today's presentation is of particular significance to me, I must say, because I have Jewish roots on my father's side, and also since my sons Noah and his mother and everyone on that side of that family are also Jewish. Many in our family, in our families, in my dad's family and in my son's mother's family, have suffered anti-Semitism in Europe before and during the Second World War, and obviously that makes it something a bit particular for me today. I also find that the presentation is quite timely because I'm sure that many of you have heard that one of our colleagues, Samuel Paty, a history teacher, was murdered in France last month after completing a class on freedom of speech. He was actually beheaded in front of his school by a Salafist extremist who claimed to be an Islamic State militant. And of course, police investigations are still going on at this point. But what I want to say is that there have been a great number of terrorist attacks in Europe in the recent years, and many have targeted members of the European Jewish communities, and also teachers and also students, some in Belgium, some in France, countries where I have lived personally, and also other countries. The Jewish communities have not been, of course, the only targets of terrorism, but Jews have this peculiar particularity that they are a little bit like the proverbial canaries in the coal mine. And anti-Semitism always tells us a lot about the level of hate speech and intolerance in any society. So I think that we all have a lot of questions today. Why is anti-Semitism on the rise around the world, and particularly in Europe? What is fueling that rise in anti-Semitism? Why do teachers have to censor themselves, and why are there some historical subjects that appear to be off limit today, such as the Holocaust? En français, on parle de la Shoah. And as this was the case with Samuel Paty, freedom of speech also. And these are subjects that can't be addressed anymore in many European schools, and obviously that is a concern. Teachers are unfortunately on the front line, and we all know how difficult it can be to be a teacher in certain circumstances. As teacher, I'm sure that we all have lots of questions, and we are certainly all delighted to have Jasmine Wong and Erez Zobari with us today to try to elucidate some of these questions and bring us some perspective on this worrisome phenomenon. So I think that I've spoken enough, so I'm going to now pass the baton to Jasmine. I'm going to make Jasmine a host, and then she will share her a screen, and we can start the presentation. So Jasmine, give me a second. I'm just going to make you the host. Okay, no. Did I make Eris the host? Yes. No? Are you the host, Jasmine? I'm not sure. I cannot hear you. I think your microphone is unmuted. You need to unmute
I am
it.
the host. Thank you.
You're the host. Okay, perfect.
I am the host.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I let you go ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michelle. And actually, I mean, the way that you began so eloquently by talking about this sort of bigger picture, this bigger context that we're in is where we wanted to start as well. Just inviting all the participants who have joined our call today to take a moment and in the chat to let us know what has brought you here. We heard from Michelle how global context, how personal histories, how personal identity have impacted his own personal interest in being here beyond being, part of the OTF webinar team. So if you'd like to take a moment in the chat, we'd love to see a little bit more about what each of you, what's motivating each of you to be here, recognizing that it could be many, many things. Let me see if I can figure out how to.
I just want to note that I'm not a co-host anymore. And as somebody who's not a co-host, I can't send a message to the entire Zoom call. I can only send a message to Jasmine or Lindy privately.
All right, so I'll make you a co-host. Yes. And
Erez, you should anyway be able to send messages to everyone. Just sometimes you have to put it back to everyone. It defaults to whoever your last person was, but everybody should actually be able to enter stuff in the chat.
Okay, I see it now, but before there were only 2 names in the list. It didn't have all 61 people.
Okay, great, now that it's correct.
Okay. And now I'm having trouble getting chat open. Here we are.
I'm having a hard time.
Great. Michelle, you shouldn't have said that we're Zoom experts. You know that. Just sets us up.
Yes, you know more than me, so but it's okay. It's no worries. It's going to be fine. Don't worry.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot here. Both individuals who are saying this is about personal growth, something where it's about equipping themselves to teach about anti-Semitism, to address it. Some have really personal connections to histories of extreme anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism. Some who are thinking about the courses that they're teaching or the courses that they will be teaching in the classroom. Yeah, thank you. So we can keep the chat running just so we can hear a little bit more and see each other a little bit more. It's great to see all of you who have joined us and the ways in which you are, the hats that you wear as you enter into today's workshop. Erez, do you want to go over the instructions?
Sure.
Okay.
Could you put it into, I don't see that it's on present mode, so it's hard for me to see the full slide.
Is it not? I'm sorry, it's on present mode on my screen. Give me a second. This is where all of you can tell that usually Erez is the one who is running all the Zoom, and oh, I have my screen sharing as paused. Here we go, resume share. How about now? Let me put it back on, not share, but present.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, thank you.
Amazing. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight. It's so great to see 60 people on a Wednesday afternoon. We have a lot to do today, so we should get started as soon as possible. We're going to quickly contract for intentional community. We're going to talk about the diversity of the Jewish communities and how these different communities may experience anti-Semitism in different ways. We are going to talk about developing a critical consciousness and tools for historic and contemporary anti-Semitism. And this is where we're going to go to VoiceThread. So if you haven't yet, please create an account for VoiceThread. We're going to be going over there. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism in school settings. We'll be hearing from people aged 18 to about 25 years old. We'll be hearing some responses from a survey that I put out back in August. And then we will have our wrap up and talk about some next steps for being involved more in Facing History.
Yeah, thank you, Erez. So just a quick note about who Facing History is and the way in which we enter into teaching about this particular history, this historical and long-running hatred. Facing History in ourselves has at its heart the mission to engage young people, to engage students, as well as to equip teachers with tools and resources to stand up to bigotry and hatred. When we look at these difficult histories through this lens, where we are first looking and examining ourselves and the issues that sit between who we are, the way that we identify, and the way in which society puts labels on us. And we can begin to see how these kinds of conversations are important as we then look at these histories of hatred. While we talk about difficulty and identity linked histories, and it can raise many fears. However, we anchor ourselves on this hope that when we equip students adequately with historical knowledge, when we look at the impacts and the legacies and of past moments of history and harm, that students can be engaged in seeing themselves in this history. They can see how moments of our own identities could be at risk. We often think about sort of this idea that James Baldwin brings up. Sorry. He so eloquently describes that, you know, history, as nearly no one seems to know, is not merely something to be read. It does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us. We're unconsciously controlled by it, and history is literally present in all we do. History, the study of these histories, is personal. It can trigger strong emotions, and we see that in some of what you've put in the chat. It can invite big questions about ethics, the choices that we make, and ask us to consider, what am I going to do today? That center of that informed civic responsibility. What am I going to do today because I understand the past? And it's through this lens at Facing History that we approach how we talk about these difficult histories, whether for ourselves and how we take care of ourselves, but also as we enter into classrooms as teachers working with students. How are we recognizing that in bringing the history of anti-Semitism and talking about contemporary issues of anti-Semitism, we are recognizing that there is both emotional engagement, emotional triggers for our students, but that we also want them to be asking these ethical reflective questions, that they are moral philosophers. We want to equip them with that intellectual rigor, that historical content, what scholars talk about as building critical consciousness, so that they can be equipped to understand why it is that we see the kinds of tropes, the kinds of myths, the kinds of falsehoods that we see today. What's at the root of that? And then how do we use that knowledge to then debunk those kinds of myths and end them? Because this is emotionally difficult content, because this is about identity, because it's about myth and stereotype, these kinds of ideas that can impact any one of us. We always begin by first contracting with each other for respectful and reflective discourse. And we encourage you, as you think about your own students as well and how you might talk about contemporary or historical anti-Semitism in your classroom, to also think about how is it that you are creating courageous, intentional spaces where, as once again, I think this is Baldwin again, I need to move my little video screen. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. So in these conversations, what is not part of a conversation, you know, what is not okay is dehumanizing each other. We always seek in this kind of discourse to challenge ideas, but not to challenge each other's humanity. And so we often begin with the brilliant poem by Mickey Scott Bay-Jones, this idea of an invitation to brave space. And that's where we'd like to begin with each of you today, as we will be asking you to be in brave space with us, recognizing that for so many of you, as you've listed here, I don't know what I don't know. What if I bring this into the classroom and students are triggered? There are these fears that we carry into this space because maybe there are people, there are teachers around us who we will perceive as knowing so much more about this history, about contemporary anti-Semitism than we do. But we always remember to anchor ourselves on the hopes that we have, that this is about being brave so that we can equip ourselves and students to be what we call upstanders against injustice. So let's read this together. Excuse me. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love and have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. The space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. And so as we continue through the rest of this virtual workshop, I encourage each of you to hold on to what Mickey Scott Bay-Jones invites us into. So when you have a chance to do breakouts, to open up your mic and your camera, to remember that this is a brave space where you can start somewhere and continue to grow, and that we will work on it side by side. Eris, I pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jasmine. So before we talk about anti-Semitism, I think it's really important to talk about the diversity of Jewish people. And this is particularly important to me because I am both an Ashkenazi, European, and Middle Eastern Jew. And I often didn't feel growing up that this was reflected in Jewish history and talked about when we speak about anti-Semitism and how different groups of Jewish people may experience anti-Semitism differently. And so I want to start with this poem that talks a little bit about breaking the single story. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So I like starting with that quote when we talk about the diversity of groups and really honoring that we are all unique and that we all are more similar than we might think. So when we're talking about the diversity of Jewish people and the ancestral backgrounds, these are the main ancestral backgrounds of Jewish people. So we have Ashkenazi Jews, which come from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and Germany. We have the Sephardic Jews, which come from Spain, Morocco, Tunisia, Portugal, and southern France. We have Mizrahi Jews, and so those are Jewish people from modern Iraq, Iran, Yemen, Syria, and then we also have Beta Israel, and those are Jews of Ethiopian descent. You can even see in the pictures below, there is no really one Jewish look. There are so many different groups of Jewish people that come from many different countries, and each each different group here has very, very different customs when it comes to food, language, religious adherence. And so it is really difficult to kind of lump in what does Jewish mean or what does Jewish look like when there is so much diversity within us. Awesome. So I've linked this in an email that you will get after the workshop. I just love this map because I learned a lot from it just to see how many Jewish communities there are around the world. It's an interactive virtual map. So you click on each pin and it tells you a little bit about the history, both currently and in the past, of how many Jewish people are in each place, what their cultures and customs are like. So after the workshop, if you are interested, you can take a look at this map on your own time. And then just talking a little bit about the diversity of Jewish denominations. Being Jewish can mean many, many different things for all of us. And so the big three Jewish denominations are Reform, Conservative, and Modern/Ultra-Orthodox. So when we look to Reform Judaism, that basically talks more about Jewish ethical law versus the Jewish law. So if you've heard of keeping kosher and maintaining the Sabbath, not using electricity on Friday night to Saturday night, Reform Judaism doesn't place those as high importance. It talks more about the Jewish ethical law, how we need to treat our neighbors, how we need to treat each other, our bodies. Often Reform synagogues are politically progressive. So often there will be female rabbis and there can be musical instruments during services. Also social justice oriented, doing a lot of work within the communities, both Jewish and non-Jewish communities. And really you do have a personal choice in the matter of ritual observance within Reform Judaism. And Conservative Judaism, moving on, is really the midpoint of observance between Reform and Orthodox. And Jewish laws here, they are mandatory, but there are some modifications. So for example, you're not allowed to drive your car on the Sabbath, but within some conservative communities, you're allowed to drive just to synagogue and back and to nowhere else. And then if you go to Modern Ultra-Orthodox, this is the more traditional adherence to Jewish law. It's quite strict observance. With modern Orthodox, some people won't wear the traditional garb like the payas, but within Ultra-Orthodox, that will be more present. And within the ultra-Orthodox communities, we see the Haredi communities. There were a bunch of Netflix shows that came out in the last few years about the Haredi communities in New York. And so those are the ultra-Orthodox communities. They're quite insular. They speak often Yiddish. And so that is also quite different from the other groups. And they are wearing the traditional garb. And then we also have Reconstructionists. So moving out of the big three religious denominations, Reconstructionist Judaism unites Jewish history, tradition, culture, belief with more modern scientific knowledge and the way that we live today. So trying to evolve with its people. Often there are more younger people who are joining Reconstructionist Judaism. And then we have secular and cultural Judaism. And this is where you practice really no or little religious observance, but there is a really large emphasis on community and partaking in cultural activities that for you bring meaning and connection. Awesome. And I just wanted to share a little bit about my Jewish identity because I think it's always nice to hear big picture and then to bring it in on a more personal level. And so when I talk about or think about my religious affiliation, I grew up conservative. I grew up going to a conservative synagogue with my mother's Ashkenazi side. And then I grew up going to a more conservative Orthodox Yemenite shul on my dad's side. But right now, I really categorize myself as culturally Jewish. So I don't keep Sabbath. I keep kosher at my parents' house, but not at my apartment downtown. I don't really adhere to the holidays, but I find that Judaism is a very big part of my identity and who I am as a person. In terms of cultural background, I'm Ashkenazi, so my family is from Poland and Hungary, and then my dad's side of the family is from Yemen. So I have two very, very diverse cultures there. And I always say, when I go to my grandparents' house in Toronto, it's like a beautiful condo and we have a lovely Shabbat dinner. And then I go visit my Yemenite grandparents and it's a very different experience. We sleep on mats on the floor and it's like just a very different culture and environment. And I love both of my cultures so much. And I really can't imagine not having both of them in my life. And in terms of community affiliation, I went to a Jewish youth movement growing up. So that's where I learned a lot about my Judaism and also grew up at Hebrew Day School. and cultural connections, because I see myself as culturally Jewish. I connect to Judaism through Hebrew, food, dance, music. And I just want us to keep in mind that when we have Jewish students in our classrooms, they're going to have their own identity list like this, with very different answers, I'm sure, for mine. And you might have 10 Jewish students in your class, and each of them will have a different identity, a Jewish identity. So just keeping in mind that it is very different for all of us. So I want everybody to take 3 minutes really quickly to either jot it down on a piece of paper or on a note on your computer or phone. I want you to think about how the ideas and information I just spoke about connect to what you already know about Jewish people. I want you to think about how this information extends or broadens your thinking about Jewish people. And also if this information challenges or complicates your understanding of Jewish people, or if you have any questions that it raises for you. And if you do have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We also will be sending out an exit form at the end of the workshop where you can submit any lingering questions, which we will answer as well.
So thank you, Chantal, for starting us off, and Michelle. If you want to just take another minute. Eris, what I love about your starting with your own personal identity is it reminds me of how important it is, as you were talking, to be thinking about ways in which for any one of our identities, we are, as James Waller talks about, diamonds. There are so many different facets to us. And we know this inherently about ourselves. We know this inherently about people who we grow up with, people who we are exposed to in our youth. But oftentimes when we don't know what we don't know. And so it is always important for us to assume, to sort of kick that bias that we often have, that, Deicide talks about, where we flatten the experiences of others, but instead to always assume that there is more complexity than what we see or what we can assume about someone who has a different faith, who comes from a different place, who speaks a different language. And so that takes me back to that facing history, scope, and sequence, and why it is that we invite students to themselves think about the complexity of their own identities, to hear from other students about the complexity of their own identities. And as I think about sort of what brings a lot of you here around how we challenge hate, so much research around how we challenge hate and how we challenge extremism, it really starts with how we listen to each other, how we build community and connections across differences. How we honor and listen to students who may not feel like they have a place of belonging, but instead create spaces of belonging. And so that part around identity and identity exploration is inviting students into that knowledge, but also into that practice of being in community, of creating a place of belonging where each of us has a voice and can see ourselves. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for all the comments and the reflections that have been posted to the chat thus far. We do this as well as a pedagogical practice, because when we think about what it means to explore a history of hatred, it's also so important for us to always ground ourselves in diversity and in strength, intentionally and explicitly. And so Eris has sort of kicked us off a little bit to do that. And as we enter into the next section, we're going to start building up we're going to sort of rewind, and we're going to start looking at history. We're going to start examining the ways in which stereotypes and myths have been created. And we're looking primarily at historical roots of anti-Semitism from 70 CE through to 1945. And we hope that this knowledge will, as I talked about earlier, equip you to help share knowledge to help you and your students to teach and recognize how it is manifest, how anti-Semitism is manifest today. What's really important as I frame the next session is that this is not, you know, in the next sort of 25 minutes, you're not going to get a comprehensive overview of the history of anti-Semitism or of contemporary anti-Semitism. You're not going to get a comprehensive look at how church history, Christian church history, or Judaism and its history are intertwined. You know, this is a broad overview and introduction. The next section, it does look at the history of the church and its complicity, but it is not intended to be a critique of Christianity or challenge it on a faith basis. Rather, it is an analysis of history and not theology. So we always have to remember that, you know, of those many facets of humanity, that there is this intertwining of context, of identities, of religious beliefs, but also of political and sociological systems at play. It's not intended to make generalizations about your understanding or of the historical understandings or experiences with anti-Semitism, or to assume a hierarchy of isms. You know, when Erez talks about her own identity, we see that intersectionality when we look at the ways in which there are so many different facets to what it could mean to be self-identify as Jewish. We recognize that there is complexity everywhere. And that when we look at a history of anti-Semitism, it isn't to say that other isms are unimportant. We could look at ways in which intersectionality, and we see it in some of the images, exists. The session is also not intended to defend or challenge Israel, Zionism, or politics in the Middle East. We're simply looking at this question of how is it that myths and stereotypes are formed. As we enter into looking at this history of how anti-Semitism, how these images, you know, give us a particular language for anti-Semitism, we wanted to bring up the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition. As it reads, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews. So we're looking at perception and stereotype, this sort of lumping in of this single story, right? Which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So you can hold on to that definition. Like Era said, you'll have this link, so you'll have access to this. And we hope that this will be a tool for your back pocket. As you think about what this might look like in the classroom, you could ask students to create a working definition of anti-Semitism first, and then have them read this and compare those definitions. Or you can have students do what we call a big paper. So putting out this definition and having students try to make sense of it by asking questions, by engaging with the words, by making their own personal connections to what's here. And then I just wanted to take a quick moment, sort of this footnote about anti-Semitism, which you often see in Word autocorrect or Google autocorrect versus the term anti-Semitism. So I have read through Dr. Doris Bergen and her book, A Concise History of the Holocaust, you know, that this idea of the word a Semite, it comes from a linguistic region in the mountains north of India. And this term was applied by anti-Semites to apply to Jewish people. However, a Semite does not actually exist. This is a racialized term. And so when we hyphenate, it implies that there is such a thing as a Semite, versus when we say anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism exists. There's no doubt about that. And so that's why we use the term anti-Semitism and not anti-Semitism. I hope that's clear. If not, shoot me an email and I can try to send you a copy of what Doris wrote. Okay, so Erin, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So we spoke a little bit about VoiceThread, and we are going to be navigating over there in just a moment. I'm going to post the link in the chat. This is what the VoiceThread will look like. You'll see that the EZ on the side, you will want to click on that to read any notes that are corresponding to the images. And then Jazz, if you could go to the next slide.
Sure.
Just in terms of navigating VoiceThread, so you can move back and forth with the arrows. And if you want to see an outline like this, so it will show you the entire VoiceThread and you can skip from different ones. If you just click those two mirroring screens, that will give you this image. And so you're going to click on that VoiceThread. We're going to put all of you into breakout groups. We're going to have 10 minutes to look through the VoiceThread independently. If you made a VoiceThread account, we asked you to do this so that you can comment on the actual VoiceThread using these prompts. And so you'll be able to see each other's comments and you can leave messages for each other. When you're doing this, so when you have the 10 minutes of independent time, please keep your camera and microphone off. We'll send out a broadcast message when it's time to convene as a group. And then you will have, I think it's 15 minutes to debrief questions that are on the end of the VoiceThread as well, and we'll shoot them on the screen here. So you will have 15 minutes to do a full group conversation with the questions at the end of the VoiceThread.
Okay.
I can see Jasmine's making the groups right now.
Yeah.
I have a question, Erez and Jasmine. Will you guys go through the breakout rooms to talk to the people, or will you stay in the main room? What is the plan?
We'll stay here.
Okay. You stay in the main room. Okay, that's fine. And I will probably then pause for people that are going to watch this video because we are recording it. I will probably pause it while people are in the breakout room doing their exercises. And then I will start the recording again when people come out of the breakout rooms. Okay?
Perfect.
Okay,
So
perfect.
please stay on VoiceThread.
Yes.
If Erez didn't already say that. I will open all the rooms. Please feel free to turn your cameras off, so that people know that you are working your way through, and we will see you back here in 25 minutes.
Time flies.
And I have restarted the recording just a minute ago.
So I'll just send people a message. So if you are watching the recording, I will be scrolling through the breakout, so you have an opportunity to see what the participants who are live learning with us are looking at. We're starting with a quote by Dr. Doris Bergen, a historian, the Chancellor Rose and Ray Wolfe Chair in Holocaust Studies at the University of Toronto. And this was excerpted from the opening chapter of A Concise History of the Holocaust. We're asking participants on this workshop to be going through a virtual gallery walk. So interacting with the primary sources themselves and making sense of how we understand images, how we understand chronology, how we understand voice, particularly historical perspectives. And then we take a step back and we critique. What do we understand because of who or what is publishing this kind of primary source? What is it that the audience was intended to see? What is it that the audience would have seen? And as we think about chronology, what kind of other sources of information would have been available to individuals during this time? How does that help us to understand this idea of the myth of monolith, where sources of information, particularly in ancient times, would have been very limited due to lack of technology or lack of published print, certainly internet, television, or radio, but also as we think about the role of illiteracy and what it means to be illiterate in a time where images will be one of the really powerful ways of learning. Iris, has somebody put something in chat that needs to be responded to? We're doing okay. Okay, great, thanks.
I think we are doing okay. Yep.
Great.
Is Jessica still on the call? Okay, so Jessica actually wrote, I couldn't join, there was no sound. And I see Jessica's on the call.
Okay. If Jessica would like to come back into the main room, we are going through the images here.
Jessica was sent to room 10, so I'm not sure if we want to try again to see if that group works.
There's nobody
Okay,
in room
never
10.
mind. Jessica wants to stay in the chat. Okay.
Can you, do you want me to do a broadcast all? Let people know that that they should be starting to have a conversation?
Yes, they should
Okay.
probably maybe 4 more minutes for group conversations.
Okay.
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes? Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Because we were supposed to have 4:55. We were supposed to go to the next slide. So that way we'll only be like 5 minutes behind. Not too bad.
Super. Eris, I'm gonna push you to room 3. Somebody is asking for help.
Okay.
Thank you, Eris. You okay, Eris? You're back.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh
Hi,
my
Kimberly.
goodness. I don't know what was just happening. I didn't even know what I was doing. I was looking at the interesting pictures, but is it supposed to be voiced?
Nope, it is not. If you are not
Okay.
hearing anything, it's because there is nothing to voice. And
Okay.
actually, we should do that. Just because it's called VoiceThread doesn't mean you're going to hear something.
Yeah, I didn't know. So I was looking at it and I wasn't able to talk to anyone. I didn't really know how to use it. And then there was no one in my breakout room. So I was kind of like, now, like I wanted to look at the stuff, but now I'm not in it anymore. But I see someone presenting it on the screen here.
Yes, I am presenting it for all of you who are still in the main room, so that if you are in the main room, you've had trouble with this, that you can at least look at it with me together.
Okay, good.
This is sort of the great and the terrible of technology, right? Is that when it works, it's amazing. When it doesn't work, it's horrible. So we're going to pull people back now. What do you think, Eris? How are we doing for timing?
Another minute. I did go to the room and nobody was there.
Oh, that's because Kimberly joined our room here.
Oh, perfect. Okay, awesome.
Yes. Unfortunately, Brennan has been left in room 1 on their own and has nobody to talk to. So this is the problem with doing, for all of you who are watching, if you love to turn on your webinar and what you're expecting is a talking voice. So while you're cooking, you're doing your dishes, you're in the car, you're driving, this is not that kind of workshop. So this is where the best laid plans. Okay, but we're looking through these images and we can see how they change over time, and yet we see you know, both sort of this idea of the continuity of ideas, the changing of ideas that are happening. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing that. And then we'll bring everybody back.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jasmine. Thanks for filling the gaps and showing us the iconography. I think that is very interesting, you know, really, really interesting. I think that there's so much iconography that has been produced on anti-Semitism. It's a endless mine or endless pit, whatever you want to call it. There's so much to see. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, there was a question raised whether or not we would be sharing these images and the gallery walk afterwards. The answer is yes. Obviously, if you're doing this within your own classroom, you have a lot more options for how you might want to do this. We do it through VoiceThread because we want to show you what is possible, but obviously you can use Google Slides. You know, you could use and have students comment that way. You could, if you're on Teams or if you are physically in the classroom and there is, or if you want to do an outdoor classroom, you can print these off and have students do an outdoor gallery walk. Or if there is a space within your hallways of your school where you can still be bubbled, but do this gallery walk, staying apart with your masks, whatever the case may be where you are located. We hope that there are options for students to be up and on their feet and looking at these images, to be thinking critically about what they see, but also to be in some kind of discussion, whether it is a virtual discussion, a text discussion, and a post-it note discussion on the images. There's lots of ways to sort of modify this kind of idea. So welcome back, everyone. I think you're all back. So let me just start back up the slides. And while I am getting things back up and running, which always takes a moment. So here we go. Sorry, I'm gonna stop talking so I can figure this out. Share
It's
screen,
okay.
here we go.
Thanks.
Okay. So what you saw in these images, they are, of course, these myths and these tropes. Perhaps in your discussion, some of the things that were raised are stereotypes, right? How is it that you continue to see these stereotypes being memed in contemporary online discussion? How do you see these being twisted and taking on new life within the kinds of things that students are exposed to on social media, online, in text, or through stories that they sort of hear in the ether, whether through family or community? And so I want to take a quick, so we're going to do a flyby, but what I want to share with you is, and Erez, maybe you can pop the video resource links into the chat. We're not going to spend time looking at those now, because each of those is about like a 10, 11, 12-minute video that addresses each of these myths, as well as some additional myths that have bolstered anti-Semitism throughout history. And these are resources that you can share directly with students. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have the scholarship, this is a great resource for you. So looking at each of these, with the first being the idea of the wandering Jew, sorry. There is in Martin Gilbert, a historian, has documented and published just a long, long history of Jewish life within Europe, anywhere from up to sort of 2,300 years to 88 years. So, you know, this idea of like, we can challenge the idea of Jewish people having no home within Europe. What does it mean to have a place or a home? You know, is 3,000 years not enough? And so that might be something you can keep in your back pocket. The problem with the Deicide Charge, so many of you will have seen those images of sort of the murder of Simon. You see the cross with the babies, this idea of like ritual murder, or the demonization of Jewish people within these texts. We saw those images from Ecclesia and Synagoga. But the problem with it is that Jesus and his early followers are Jewish, and they would have known this at the time. This was the rift that happens with a family rift. The historical Jesus was a reformer within Judaism. The idea that Jewish people could have been responsible for deicide, this idea of killing Christ, is false. There's no historical record for it. Crucifixion itself was a Roman practice. And within the Roman Empire, Jews lacked the power to enact that kind of punishment for anyone. And for the early Christian church, or the sect of Judaism that was following Jesus, the idea of blaming their rulers, blaming Pontius, blaming the Romans was not a politically viable option. But as we move forward in history through the 300 CE of the Common Era, there is this sort of family split with the fall of Jerusalem in the sort of 70 CE. And in 312, the institution of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire through Constantine. So we see that the idea of this sort of Jewish sect being grounded in a Jewish history and identity becomes one that is an identity for those who have no relationship with those historical roots, with that sort of common family thread. And then as we look at St. Augustine's theology in 354, he writes, among many things, that Jews were the killers of Jesus, but they were still God's people. The theology was that Jews had been sort of ordained by God to play this particular role, but they were God's people and would come to God in the end, and would eventually convert to Christianity in the end. As we move forward in time, I mean, we haven't documented the whole history of how these messages, permutate and form through histories of conflict, histories of plenty and want. The message becomes distorted. In 1965, at the Vatican II Council, the Deicide Charge was put to rest. It was, it was deemed a falsehood, and Pope John Paul II delivered a formal apology and an ask for forgiveness at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. The problem with ritual murder, I mean, Erez and I were talking about this earlier, how do we think about, something that seems so outlandish? But we think about how much people love to believe in conspiracy theories, and the ways in which conspiracies continue to speak to elements of our society, of ourselves. And so this is some of the problems with it. By law, Jews were forbidden to taste blood. According to Jewish dietary law, kosher law, the preparation of meat meant avoiding the possibility of eating blood. So this whole myth completely flies in the face of Jewish law. When we look at that, all those images around Jewish, magicians or wizards, or poisoning of the wells. Again, this is, we now know a lot more about science. We also have, so if we take a step back, we can also look at other groups that existed and that moved throughout Europe during this time. We now know that the Black Plague was caused by a bacterium that was carried by rats and by rat fleas. And that sort of interestingly, as we look at this history, there's this other group that existed within the time of the Middle Ages. These flagellants is a group of Christians who believed that by self-flagellation, by living with nothing, without bathing, without without anything, that they could humble themselves so much, that they could punish themselves so much that God would be pleased, that they saw themselves as a sacrifice. But they moved from town to town to town. And those towns that they visited, mothers would often hand their babies because they believed that these were holy people. But as we see, unfortunately, I mean, the movement of these individuals through these towns, the lack of sanitation, what we see instead is that the map of these flagellants moving through places instead drummed up pogroms, drummed up anti-Semitism, drummed up these false beliefs that Jewish people were the cause of the plague. Some of the images that you saw were picturing Jewish people as both wealthy moneylenders, sort of, as well as these poor merchants who are sort of out and wandering. There's that image of the wandering Jew. So where does this idea come from, that Jewish people are wealthy moneylenders? And we see this idea reiterated again as we look at the Protocols of Elders of Zion. By the end of the 11th century, Jews were being squeezed out of international trade, where they had an advantage historically because of early numeracy systems that had been picked up through the Middle East. They were set apart as being suspicious. And so for Europeans who saw Jewish people as outsiders, the ruling class could say, you know what, we've got this. We are going to be the merchants. We are now taking on trade. We are now taking on law and teaching and all these things. And so as Jewish people were squeezed out of any other kinds of occupations, they began to have to turn towards money lending, which was forbidden within Jewish law and Christian and Muslim law. But for many, they fought back, but some were forced into this occupation. And we're seen in a particular light. There's a lot more to this, again, that I hope you will read on in some of the resources that we share. And finally, one that continues to persist today in sort of more obvious forms is this idea of a Jewish cabal of elders who are somehow controlling the world, controlling economies, controlling war. And again, this has been proven again and again and again to be patently false. But this particular myth has continued to persist. Shortly after its publication in the early 1900s, it took on new life within Germany. And shortly, but even before that, the Times of London showed that the authors had copied long passages from several fictional works. And so it has been disproven many, many times. And the data would show that it is also not possible. Jewish people represented, I think in Germany, 500,000 out of 60 million people. And certainly while there were one or two, there were a handful of wealthy Jewish people, there were Jewish people certainly within the middle class. But there's also photographic evidence. There's also stories of Jewish food banks, places that helped Jewish poor. There was the gamut. But again, we can think about, as we think about sort of how ideas are formed, where is it that prominence imprints itself and creates these biases that exist? And then how do these myths then wrap around sort of these singular stories? Okay, so I'm going to pause there because we're going to pivot and we're going to take a look at what teachers and students and alumni recognize as anti-Semitism today. So obviously there are these examples that we can think about on the internet. There's some really obvious examples. But as we look at sort of these microaggressions, how is it that some of these, what can we learn, right? How do we understand anti-Semitism as it appears today? All right, I believe we'll have a link to share. And so, Erez, do you want to talk a little bit about the survey that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So I put out a survey on my personal Facebook and Instagram. I'm pretty involved in the Jewish communities all over Canada, but also the United States. I have a lot of Jewish friends and Jewish communities over there. And it was my intention to kind of show the more microaggressions that we face and the comments that are said both within schools, but also outside of schools. And so I'm not sure who responded to these. What I do know is that my circles are largely aged 18 to 25 years old. This is largely from the Toronto area, but also again from the United States and from across Canada, but it is largely from Toronto and GTA. And I know that some students former students of public schools, both in York region, Toronto region, Durham region. And so these are just responses from people within my community who wanted to share with all of you things that they've experienced and faced in hopes that we can all walk away together, just kind of understanding a little bit more about the microaggressions that Jewish people may face, both in school and outside of school.
So what we're going to invite you to do now, so this is sort of a little bit of a break from the history we're now looking at today and the classroom, but we hope that as you're reading through this, one of the things that you are looking for is how might something that you learned about today, whether it is errors as part of the presentation, whether it's something about how we frame, maybe it's Doris Bergen or the definition of anti-Semitism, or maybe it's this understanding of these myths and tropes. How might some of this equip you to prevent or address anti-Semitism in your classroom? And sort of as an organization, what I didn't say at the beginning is that we are grounded in curriculum, that the resources that we have are really intended for educators like yourselves to teach these histories, in a sense, to inoculate students against this kind of these myths. So we hope that you can find some links and think about what these mean for you and your students. So we have about 10 minutes for this, which isn't a lot. But why don't you take 5 minutes, if you haven't already clicked on the Padlet, to go to the Padlet. You can keep your camera off. And then for the back half of the 5 minutes, if you can each take a turn talking about what your response is and maybe something about how you can address this within your classroom, or how you might use something you learned to address what you're seeing. Okay, so I'm going to push you into your breakout groups again. We will stay here. So if you choose to not go into a breakout or you have a hard time with that, we can have a conversation here. And I will share the Padlet if I can.
And if anybody's having difficulty opening the Padlet, please let me know. We can find another solution for getting that document to you.
Okay, and what I'll do is I will share screen for those of you who are going to stay in the room. And we do hope that you can take this time to discuss with your peers. But if you choose to stay here, I will have it open for you to look at. Is that readable at all, Eris? Or is it super small?
Yeah, that's good for me. If you can zoom in maybe a little bit, yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, because there are only a few minutes remaining, and I want those of us who are still in the main group to be able to maybe share one or two things. If you are in the main group and you would like to respond to what you saw, we're going to take just maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Although we can always recontract depending on how everyone is doing for more time. If you feel comfortable turning your camera on and unmuting your mic, I'd love to hear how you're responding and maybe something about what, how what you've learned might be helpful within the classroom. Hi, Ruth. It's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too. Well, I'll just say that my husband and I were both very surprised that we're still getting the same, Jewish people are still, Jewish students are getting the same cracks that we had gotten ourselves as kids, and it's continuing. It surprised us. We thought that, you know, in a multicultural city, that people would be, and you know, well, just that teachers would even say, "Okay, you're Jewish. Tell us about anti-Semitism." You know, putting a child on the spot. It's just so awful. And myself being a Jewish teacher, I would never. I would come from a personal myself, because I'm in, you know, I'm the one in charge, but I would show it much broader, the anti-Semitism, like you did with those prints. I wouldn't just deal with Ashkenazi Jews in the Holocaust. That's my husband and I went to Poland just within the last 5 years, and we saw anti-Semitic prints in the marketplace. You know, pictures of Jews looking evil and demonic, and we thought, who would buy that?
Yeah, yeah,
It's existing. Oh.
yeah, yeah. That makes me think about some of those postcards historically, but yeah,
It's
absolutely.
happening now. It's in Poland.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
I was in conversation with Ilona Schulman-Spar, who is the lead educator and curator for the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, and she remembered seeing some of the images, anti-Semitic images on college campuses or at sort of these Unite the Right rallies. And she said, I recognize those images. I just purchased a historical artifact that is sort of the historical, you know, Nazi Germany image of what I'm now seeing in contemporary times. I think speaking to what you suggested around how is it that teachers can navigate giving student voice while not singling students out to talk about hatred that they themselves have experienced, or to, you know, single story a student to say, well, you're Jewish, therefore you should know something about anti-Semitism. I think what we can do as educators is we can invite students to talk about their identities, but not to teach the class about hatred, to what one of the comments wrote in that book. So there is, we have to make those distinctions in our minds as educators to invite student voice, but not to single students out, particularly during uncomfortable times, because we feel are uncomfortable to teach it. I think there's lots of ways, like you saw in the VoiceThread, that we can use primary sources to teach where we don't feel like we have expertise, or where those stories are more powerful than anything that we can say, because students can interact with them for themselves and make meaning for them themselves. And if a student feels like, hey, this is an opening for me to now talk about how I've experienced this, it becomes that student's initiative to do so. And it's possible that allies or those in sort of proximity to Jewish people will also say like, hey, I've seen that before. And it kills me that I see that, because I have Jewish family members or friends, or I'm a human being, and what I see is harmful. Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Were there others who wanted to respond or share? Stephanie, do you want to talk a little bit? I saw that you shared in the chat.
Sure. So basically, well, listening to Ruth also, like, I'm an Indigenous person, and like in classrooms, people are like, oh, well, Stephanie can do the land acknowledgement because she's Indigenous. It's like, well, I don't know if that's how that's supposed to work, but okay. But I completely get what you're saying, Ruth, and just like continuing today. But I think even that Padlet, all the personal information that students shared, like, that is so much more powerful than saying anti-Semitism is bad. Like, hearing those voices going, oh yeah, I've heard that before, or oh, I've seen that before, that's like, it kind of kicks you in the butt and goes, okay, I need to make changes in my own life, or I need to speak up when my friends act this way, or when my parent acts this way. So I think it's that whole like personal experience is really, really important.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. And I like too that we're thinking too about, this is sort of that idea of intersectionality and those questions of universals, right? Here we have particular experiences of hatred, particular experiences of microaggressions or feeling othered or a lack of belonging. But I would argue that, you know, within all that diamond facets that each of us have, that there are negative stereotypes that exist about any one of us. And so we can present this kind of content and ask students if they want and how they are connecting to this in their own unique and personal ways. Absolutely. So we are at 5:30, but I'm going to recontract just briefly. If you need to go and you need to be where you need to be, then I want to thank you for spending this time here. And I hope that there was richness and that you are feeling intellectually fed. But I do want to take a moment to recognize that what we are talking about here is not emotionally feeding. It's very challenging. And so I wanted to leave us with one last debrief opportunity before we leave each other. So I'm just trying to find where in the world I've put my slides. Isn't this horrible? Okay. Here we go. Google Slides, opening it up, and let me do my share screen. Okay, here we are. sharing screen, and we're going to jump right to the end. Okay, so you've seen this once before. I love using it as a way to debrief. So in the chat, I want to invite you to take a moment to share where you find yourself now. Are you in a heady place? You're sort of excited to learn more and to dig into some of those resources. You can't wait till tomorrow when we send you the packet so that you can keep diving deeper. Maybe you're thinking ethically, you're asking big questions about your classroom, about yourself, about civil society. Maybe you're in an emotional place because what you have seen or what you've discussed is hitting you really close. Or maybe it's making you feel super motivated to go into your classroom tomorrow or on Monday to begin implementing and teaching your students. Maybe you're in a place where you're thinking about your student leadership group or your own civic responsibility, your community. So in the chat, take a moment to note where are you? Other than wanting the slides. Okay, Georgina wrote, really like the reminder of the power of gallery walks and having students engage with images. Yeah. We're always walking around with our teacher hats. Lara wrote, thank you. The more I learn, the more I see, the more I hear, the more worried I am. There's not enough discussions happening around anti-Semitism. Yes, and actually this reminds me, one of the resources that we will be posting for you tomorrow is some of the curricular connections. This often comes up. How and where can I be teaching about anti-Semitism in the classroom or in my curriculum? And so we've put some thought into it, but certainly if you would like to continue that conversation, we invite you to tweet at us at Facing Canada, or you can email, or you can join our Teachers Lounge. That's thelounge.facinghistory.org. And if you don't see something in there, a channel in there where you can talk about how to integrate conversations around anti-Semitism, certainly you can start one, and hopefully there's a community that will wrap around. What part can I play? Yeah, I'm feeling more empowered. Fantastic, we're so glad. Yes, I'm sorry, sometimes technology doesn't work out, Kimberly. I had earlier, the discussion was rich, great. Very excited to use the package of information, all the above. Fantastic. Okay, now we did share our phone numbers. If there is something that is still on your mind, something that you do want to discuss, please do give us a call. If you have any questions, again, you can share an email. All right. All right, and Eras has asked if you'd like to fill out the exit card. That's another great way to get in touch with us. We will get back to you probably next week. If you leave something, a question that you'd like us to answer, if there's something that you don't see in the resource packet and you're wondering if we have resources, that is there and available for you. And so I want to thank you all for your time and attention. I'm going to pass it back over to Michelle, who has some exciting updates. So don't leave if you don't have to. There's more interesting stuff coming from OTF, and I just have to figure out how to make you a host. Oh. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes, I think you can hear me. First of all, thank you so much, Jasmine and Erez. It was truly a fantastic presentation, very different from what we usually do during our OTF Connects webinar. Our webinars are usually a bit more traditional, you know, traditional PowerPoint presentations. And I was completely amazed how you were able to multitask and jump from one application to the next and keep on top of everything. I think it shows my age, because I think that you guys are, you've grown with all this technology, and you know it a lot better than I do. I also want to thank Ruth and Stephanie for speaking up so eloquently about their personal experience. That was really, it really brought a lot to the presentation. We definitely learned a lot today. all of us. I've made a few notes, and I want to just thank a few people. I want to thank Maya. She spoke about the fact that she believes that anti-Semitism, that some people believe that anti-Semitism does not exist. She posted that comment. Georgina spoke about bigotry and how it shuts down people in society. Marlene, who is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, spoke of her responsibility, the responsibility that she feels to educate young people, something that is truly of great importance. So thank you so much, Marlene, for that. Stephanie, of course, spoke also about the importance of creating a welcoming classroom. Willem is a history teacher. He spoke about integrating social justice into his teaching. Nan spoke about her personal growth and the desire to include anti-Semitism is in her teaching, his teaching, I'm not entirely sure. Trisha told us that she started to study The Merchant of Venice in her class and spoke about talking about anti-Semitism accurately, but also tactfully, since indeed, ultimately, although we are, of course, all brothers and sisters, and there's a lot more that brings us together than divides us. When we address these kinds of issues, we want to do it tactfully, because these issues are controversial issues, they are very painful issues, and we don't want to hurt each other. Chantal wanted to see how anti-Semitism compares to other forms of racism, such as racism against the Roma people and the First Nation. We didn't address that today, but we only had an hour and a half, of course, but thanks for pointing that to us, Chantal. Isabel is a philosophy teacher and reminded us of what Socrates asked the Athenians. What type of society do we want to be in? Or what type of society do we want to create? Ultimately, it is indeed our responsibility as individuals to reject ideologies that divide us and tend to place us in arbitrary groups rather than bring us together. Heather told us some of her, that's what's interesting. Heather told us that some of her Jewish students, because she teaches in a Jewish neighborhood, she told us that some of her Jewish students tells jokes and that she feels that sometimes these jokes are inappropriate or even anti-Semitic. And I want to tell her, Heather, it's okay. Jewish people are known for joking about themselves, about their past, about their quirks. It's part of the Jewish soul. So, you know, a little bit like sometimes you hear Black people using the N-word when they tease each other. They do it in an affectionate way. So that's fine. You don't have to worry about that. Michelle told us that her husband teaches biblical and Hebrew studies. Eileen reminded us that we should always fight stereotypes. Georgia is a graduate student in Holocaust studies and joined us to learn more today, as did many others. And I can't obviously name everybody, but I just wanted to point out a few of the things that I noted. So I just want to remind you all that you will receive tomorrow a follow-up email. And in that follow-up email, you will find all the resources that we have shared today. I just want to try see if I can share one more thing with you. Anyway, it's not very important. I just want you to know that you will all receive tomorrow the link to the webinar, the slides, all the resources, and we will share everything with you. What else? I want to also invite you to visit the OTF Connects calendar, because we have lots of sessions still coming up. And I think that maybe before we are ending, I'll just tell a quick Jewish joke, because I don't think that you can't really end a webinar on Judaism without sharing a Jewish joke. I think it's part of the spirit of Judaism. During Jasmine's presentation, she was talking about the fact that some Jews in the Middle Age were aiming to humble themselves. And they were trying to maybe reach some kind of sainthood by humbling themselves. And
sorry, I should clarify, those were not Jewish people, those were Christians.
These were Christians. Okay. So, but in my stories, they are Jewish. In my stories, they are Jewish. I must have missed that they are. But in my stories, they are Jewish, and so it's a story that happens during Shabbat. And at the front of the congregation, the rabbi is sitting, and next to the rabbi is sitting the wealthiest member of the congregation, a very wealthy and very successful merchant. And at one point, the Shabbat stands up and says, "God, please forgive me. I'm truly nobody in comparison to you. I'm just a miserable worm. I'm truly a nobody. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. And at that point, obviously, the wealthy merchant stands up as well, and he says, you know, God, please forgive me as well. I'm truly nobody in comparison to you. I'm also a miserable worm. I'm truly nobody. Please forgive me. And then at the back of the room, at the back of the synagogue, there's the poorest man in the community, a completely destitute beggar that stands up, and he says, God, please forgive me. I'm also nobody. Please forgive me. And at that point, the wealthy merchant turns toward the rabbi and whispers in his ear, who did he think he is to dare to claim that he is nobody? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. So we've certainly enjoyed that session, that wonderful webinar. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Erez, one more time. I'm going to end the recording of the session, and I hope that we will see you all again on OTF Connects in the coming weeks. Thank you so much.
And thank you for reminding us that humor is a big part of any community's being and resistance and diversity.
And I don't know yet. I can stop the recording, and I guess I can stop. I'm not entirely sure. Hold on a second. Am I the host? Am I the host?